What's up, everybody? I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you so very much to everyone who came out to Termination Fee at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. I will have more to say about this next week because it has just been such an amazing experience through and through with everybody involved. And I'll say more next week once everything's settled in, basically. I'll have more to say about next steps for Termination Fee and the overall experience on this first run. But for now, I just want to say thank you. What's up, everybody? The wait is finally over and totally over. Left at Wall is available now, right now. You can get Left at Wall on Apple TV, Google Play, YouTube Movies. You can get it on demand. You can buy it on DVD. The wait is totally over. Just type in Left at Wall on your search bar on your smart TV, and you can find a bunch of ways to get it. You can watch it now. Again, that's Left at Wall, wherever you get your movies. Episode 94, Matthew Rantanen. If you know me, you know Municipal Broadband, also known as Public Broadband, is an important issue to me. Matthew Rantanen is one of the founders of Tribal Broadband Bootcamp. It's an extensive that teaches the development and maintenance of public broadband systems on tribal lands. I got to attend one. It was life-changing. Matthew's also a crazy interesting guy. He's a soccer player, a graphic designer, he grows food, and he found his way to being a broadband advocate. He's petitioned government and brought countless networks to life. Please welcome to the show, Matthew Rantanen. Matthew Rantanen, good to see you again. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for an absolutely wonderful time at the Tribal Broadband Bootcamp, my first experience. And man, I miss it. I want to go back.
Yeah, we don't have one on the books until August, and it's kind of like kind of withdrawals, you know. You get to do them. I think since the one that you came to, we had one immediately following, like 4 weeks later. Mm-hmm. We got two back to back, and now we're kind of in a gap right now. So I'm looking forward to August.
So let's kind of start at the beginning. Where are you from? How did you grow up? And how did you become the person that I met a couple months ago?
Well, let's see. I started, my parents were born and raised Spokane, Washington. And, we started in the Northwest there. My dad was in the military a little bit. He was in the Air Force during the Vietnam era. And he was moving around a little bit, went to Washington, D.C. I was actually born in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed Army Medical Hospital. So I kind of at the core of the country. And then he ended up going to Vietnam, and then my mom and my brother and I moved back to Tacoma. We adopted my brother in Tacoma, and we moved back to Spokane and then down to Pullman, Washington. My dad came back from Vietnam. We went to Germany for 3 years, Texas for a year, back to Washington State. My dad taught radiology at Washington State University and pioneered ultrasound for the equine athlete in 1983, wow, which took us to Kentucky. So I went to Kentucky, I went to Lexington, and went to high school at Tate's Creek. And then I came back to Washington State University when I graduated from high school and went through a graphic design program now. So I'm formerly a graphic designer, or as I like to say, a recovering graphic designer.
So what did you miss the Northwest, going from the Northwest to Kentucky?
Oh yeah. It was a culture shock. Well, we'd never had to deal with humidity before, and man, it's humid. I say, I wasn't a huge fan of some of the politics and some of just the general vibe of Kentucky, but I'll tell you, the organized soccer, way more organized than Washington State at the time. So I get to play a lot of really good soccer. I grabbed a few good friends out of there that moved away from Kentucky, and overall it was a good experience. The funny thing is I was on a farm in Washington State, And then I moved into the city in Lexington. So I actually got street smart in Kentucky. Go figure that
out. Yeah, that is, people would probably assume the opposite.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Lexington's, I've only been through there a few times, but it's pretty much a college town. Yeah. Like that's kind of the vibe.
Yeah. UK. I mean, UK is massive and the influence is everywhere. We had great concert experiences. That's when I started, going to concerts and stuff, because I got there around 9th grade, I guess it was.
What were you into then?
We were into stuff on vinyl. We had a few records when we were in Washington, like Kiss and Joan Jett, a few things like that. But when we got to Kentucky, I was still sort of exploring, and I got to see Bruce Springsteen at Rupp Arena. That was pretty awesome. And my brother, I don't know where he came up with them, but he shows up with these demo tape or garage recorded tapes from the Bay Area of a band called Metallica. And
oh, wow.
My brother's like, dude, you got to check this out. And so we were driving around in my car listening to this music, and we got hooked on thrash. And by the time I graduated from high school, we found this place called Bogart's in Cincinnati, which is one of the killer premier clubs in the middle of the U.S. And
I think it's still there. Yeah.
Yeah. It closed for a little bit, and then they reopened. And I know friends that have just played there again. And it's, man, that was an epic club. We did 32 shows one summer at that place. We would drive up. It's about an hour and a half drive, I think, from our place up to Cincinnati. Man, we would go to that club all the time. It was awesome. Did
you ever play, or were you always just a listener?
No, I never played. I always wanted to play bass or something, sing or something, but it never panned out. I tried in college once with a friend's band, and I ended up getting sick and losing my voice right before they had their first gig. So another friend of mine stepped in who knew the lyrics to the songs, and he stayed with them, and I never did. Pretty funny. Yeah. I don't know how much of a singer I am.
So were you playing, you played soccer throughout childhood. Were you playing in college as well?
Yeah. Washington State University didn't have a varsity team. They had a club. So it was, I don't know, there was a pecking order in that group, and they were all, oh, we don't know this guy, so you can't be on the club, kind of a thing. But we played intramurals, which was extremely aggressive and competitive, and we ended up winning the intramurals my senior year, which was pretty cool. I was playing on a team that we took down everybody, which was pretty awesome.
What made you pick graphic design?
Wow, that's interesting. We were sitting around sort of pre-Gulf War in an apartment, and I went into biology thinking, like, if I didn't know what I was going to do, I could potentially do pre-vet and follow in my dad's footsteps, which was never a dream. But I thought, well, I might be able to do something in that space. So, and biology was a good background for some of the other science stuff that I had some interest in, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I took a handful of the courses the first year and just wasn't excited about it. And I sat there and I read the entire course catalog. No kidding. I went page by page watching news about like what's happening in the Gulf. And I basically ran across graphic design, and I'd always been a creative person. My mom was one of those people that was like, oh, you're bored? Here's a lump of clay, make something. If you're bored, here's a pencil and a paper, draw me something. And so we always had this creative outlet. We were always outside making stuff. And my grandparents, both my mom's and my dad's dads, they were very creative people and very good with their hands, very good with tools and stuff. So we were always creative. And it was just one of those things where I read the description and it said, basically art for advertising is kind of how they pitched it, and art for, fashion and design. And I was like, that's what it's called. I was young and not paying attention. And I thought, I'm taking this. So I signed up for it. It was an auditorium class. Great instructor, David DeVilliers. He was a product of Paul Rand from Yale. So he had come from one of the masters. However, he embraced technology, whereas Paul Rand came out publicly and said, the computer is not a tool for graphic design. It's a distraction. And that was the end of him. So it was kind of cool to have sort of both schools of thought there. I was inspired by him, and from that point on, I aced every class in school and just, rocketed on my way out. It was great. It was super cool.
So you having both of those kind of schools like throughout your curriculum, did you migrate to one a little more than the other? I mean, eventually, obviously, the computer became the way of the lay of the land, but were you kind of always balancing both?
Well, we were early, right? So we did a lot of hand setups, a lot of photostat cameras, a lot of like heat transfer printer kind of things to see large scale versions of what we were going to do before we printed it. So almost like blueprint kind of printer things. A lot of hand mock-up stuff, a lot of cutouts. And so I think that's really advantageous to, my quality of design was I knew the old way, but then I also then embraced the computer. Interestingly enough, like we had a computer lab, so I actually stayed for 5 years because the college got accredited within the university to be offering the Bachelor of Fine Arts and then Master of Fine Arts program. So I stayed one more year to get my BFA. My initial plan was BFA in graphic design, MFA in film, and I was going to be a film director. So after I figured this out, right? So then I wanted the BFA, so I stuck around. So my first senior year, we had a computer lab and brand new system, all Apple based with a server, Photoshop, Illustrator, all the basics back then. Somebody ripped off the server in the middle of the night. And, of course they didn't code the door with everybody having a separate key code. When it would hold like 200, they only gave the same code to everybody. And so our computer choices were dead for a year for, those 2 semesters. I had a friend who said, there were 4 of us, brought us together, and he sat us down with a really serious talk. He was way beyond where we were mentally. He's like, look, if you don't go home and make money and get a computer by next year, you are not going to work in graphic design when we graduate. And we were like, what? And so the 4 of us bought computers when we got back to school, and we're no kidding, the only 4 people that worked in graphic design out of 28 graduating students.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's just wild how fast all that stuff goes.
Yeah, it was quick.
And we're seeing another iteration of it right now, I feel like, in many ways.
Yeah,
I mean, we always are.
Yeah, for sure.
So you graduate school, and then what happens?
So I did graphic design for about, a couple of years of freelance, and I got picked up by Blue Mountain Arts, which is a traditional greeting card company. In a roundabout way, I was doing sub work for another designer who didn't have enough time to do this work, and it was busy work. I did the work. I turned it in. They called me right away, like, this is great. Funny, I had a fax machine. They sent me a quiz on a fax machine, like, I don't know, it was like 7 questions. And I answered the questions. I'm like, man, this is ridiculous. I answered the questions, and one of the questions was written incorrectly. So I corrected the question and then answered it correctly and sent it back. Called me immediately. What do you mean this is wrong? We need to meet with you. And so the next day I had an interview, got hired on the spot to do graphic design work for Blue Mountain Arts, and effectively not work for the traditional greeting card company so much, but worked directly with Steven Schutz, the owner, on developing new products and stuff. A couple years into that, we developed BlueMountain.com, an idea that he had to be able to send greeting cards online. And that sold for $1 billion to Excited Home. And then, 6 months later, we all got laid off because it was a bad idea. And so that's when I got exposed to technology, is when I was at Blue Mountain. We were installing at the phone exchange in Palo Alto, we were installing web servers as a graphic designer. We were networking our offices. We were setting up new systems and doing all the IT work ourselves. And I think the technology stuck. I've always been a good manager of people. So I was able to sort of just that creative management goes right to the technology folks as well. Same kind of crazy brains. So I think I fit the mold there.
So was this kind of how, obviously we're going to spend some time talking about broadband here very soon, but was this sort of the transition then into the broadband world for you?
Yeah. So I got laid off. I was in San Francisco, living up there at the time. I went into one of those, sort of temp agency things, or like one of those places that, they collect jobs coming in, people that don't have jobs, and kind of marry them together. So I'm going through this sign-in sheet when I show up to their office, and talking to the lady about like the opportunities that are out there and, what's the market look like, et cetera. I'm going down the list and I recognize like designers that are famous. Like, I'm a hard worker. I don't know about famous in graphic design. And I'm recognizing graphic designers that are on this list to get jobs because they've been laid off. Mm-hmm. So then I realize, okay, I'm in a city, in an area, a region really, that has probably some percentage of the top designers in the U.S. all out of work looking for work. I thought, man, this is crazy. I might not get an opportunity here. So I set myself a plan. I worked on a minimum number of hours on developing my portfolio, website, web presence, whatever social was available, MySpace back then, and getting everything sort of like publicly visible, sharing that with as many locations, applying for different things as much as I could. Each day I did a certain number of hours. And then I learned to go live in the city of San Francisco without a car. I had a car the whole time I worked there, but I always drove it, and I never walked around and took the public transit or rode my bike. Then I switched gears and got into that, and I got into this real creative mind space and just interest in the city and sort of the cyber aspects of San Francisco, the late night, all the functions that go on through there, like showing up to galleries and things where they had their free nights and sketches and, drinking and sketching and doing all this fun stuff that really is like the city's your living room. Kind of exposed me to a bunch of different ideas. And then I got a call, creative director of Blue Mountain said, "Hey, we did this project back in the day with HP. Do you remember the gentleman who was running that project for them?" And I said, "Yeah." Well, they're looking for somebody to do community web portals, effectively websites in San Diego, and it's working with a bunch of tribes. Thought, what a perfect match. So I went down to San Diego and interviewed at Hewlett Packard for 4 hours, I think. And it was, a cool interview. Just so happens the guy that interviewed me, the guy that was in charge of that, went to Washington State University. Hilarious coincidence. We drove out to the reservations. I met a couple of the people that run some of the programs, and I got hired at Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association to basically teach and to be a resource for tribes to build their internal-facing community web portals and then external-facing websites. And did that for the first year or so. But in the process, they were managing a $4.5 million grant from Hewlett Packard, and they had $1 million in cash and the rest in equipment. And they had, this, oh my God, we got $1 million in cash. I'm like, $1 million is not that much money. I just came from a place where they pretty much burn $1 million in the garage every day just for fun. And, those guys are going under. It doesn't pay for that much stuff. We really need to define who what we're going to do and what we're not going to do, and kind of restructure this so that we don't, overextend. And tribal leadership was looking at me like, wait a minute, how much of this stuff do you know? And we started talking more in depth about where I'd been and what I'd done. And they offered me the position of director of technology to manage this effort moving forward. And so I took over I started in 2001. I took over in 2002, that program. And I still work for them today. I'm still working 10 hours a day with them. I was full-time up until I started working for, advising the state of California on their big fiber builds.
So the technology job, was it exclusively broadband, or was it, because it sounds like it just was a little bit of everything. Like describe the actual position a little more.
Yeah. So I started out in, doing my graphic design background stuff, but quickly, because I knew the technology and installing web servers and things like that, quickly the network that we had to build to serve the resource centers on the different tribes, we needed people to be able to focus on that. So we really shuffled the deck of who was involved. There was a guy that was in education who really wanted to do the technology, had the aptitude, real smart guy. He became the network administrator, and I became the director of technology. And he and I worked pretty much in tandem. I was technically his boss, but he worked in tandem with me to build the all the outside plant stuff. And we started before the word broadband was even used. We were using wireless microwave technology to push bandwidth around to support. At the time, the first 7 reservations connected to it, we had 3 megs to send around, and people were able to do most emails. Big attachments were trouble. Streaming video was pretty much non-existent, but as it became more mainstream, then we had to, start thinking about bandwidth. Upgraded to, a 45 meg connection over copper instead of wireless. And then we started to, be able to see the scalability of this. But man, we were paying $99 a meg per month. You just look at that and do the math. You can't actually afford to have a network at that price. So, then became my process of how do tribes get subsidies for this kind of stuff, like E-rate for library schools and Head Starts, or, funding programs at the Fed or foundation money, things like that. So I started to learn that piece of it, as well as managing the technical folks and being out in the field sometimes because we were very shorthanded for a long period of time. And I really got into DC. Mike and I went to DC and we pitched, why not and tribal communities, add that language to E-rate, add that language to rural utility services, things like that. And, we opened some doors on funding for tribes specifically for E-rate. And so they awarded us E-rate in 2001 with 24 hours to spend the grant for a year. And I was like, wait, what? And then we had to decline it because it was impossible, but they wanted to set a precedent so that they could do it again. And then we applied the next year and we got the funding. So we've had E-rate funding ever since, which has been really instrumental in building out that network. So that's how the technology piece of it came along. Then we started to evolve. Then we started to throw around the words broadband. Then the concept of, and this is something that I started pitching very early, is like, look, at some point in time, folks, there's going to be a big pipe that comes into your house and you're going to choose what you want over that pipe, which is similar to what we're looking at today, depending on who your provider is. And that was, people fought against that concept. They thought this is never going to happen. The traditional tribal telcos were sometimes opposed with us on policymaking because of these things. Because they had started up on a phone switching model, not a broadband pipe model where there was, a software layer on top of it. So I don't know, it was an amazing experience.
So getting big picture, to my understanding, and feel free to fill in the gaps, when broadband was pretty much being unrolled in the United States, tribal lands were largely either underserved or excluded altogether. So it was up to, your organization and other organizations similar to kind of fill that gap.
Yeah. So the initial fiber build that went across the United States, there were roughly 7 efforts being made in the U.S. to bring fiber East Coast, West Coast, and connect the NFL cities in between. And in that effort, really they were valued on how many feet they could build a day or what the mileage was, and how fast they could get that network completed. And that meant anything that slowed them down was, obstacles. So either go around it or, have a team in front of you negotiating deals across it. And if you don't get a deal, find a new path. So that happened repeatedly. It happened geographically, like the Grand Canyon. They had to go around that. They had to go around, some of the mountains. But unfortunately, they went around the reservations because they didn't know how to navigate the tribal government. They didn't do a good job of explaining to the tribal government what resources they were bringing through. They also weren't interested in leaving access to those resources in the middle. They were looking to go, pretty much end to end. So in that process, tribes got left out. And you can look at the map and see, the route go right around a reservation border and then come back around. So yeah, early on, I think it was a realization that, there probably wasn't going to be a build out by incumbent carriers to support Indian country because there probably wasn't enough return on investment based on their business model. So what did our business model look like? Could we scale that down and be able to afford some of those models, make that work in certain regions? And so Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association was already an organization now for over 50 years. They had been an organization for over, 25 years when I joined up, or maybe even a little bit more. And so they already had the infrastructure of getting along. They already had 19 tribes that were working together very well. So it made a lot of sense to house that network opportunity in that tribal consortium. Other tribes are doing it by themselves. So it's a heavier lift unless you have a very large tribal community to be able to find a sustainability model to keep that thing moving.
So then let's get to Tribal Broadband Bootcamp. What was sort of the what was sort of the beginning of the idea there, and give me a peek under the hood about how all that came to fruition.
Sure. So the boot camps, Tribal Broadband boot camps. It's interesting. So I've been collecting knowledge, living experiences in this broadband space, fighting policy, making change in this space for 24 years now. And I realistically was trying to figure out, like, how do I not work till I'm 75 like my dad did? How do I take a little bit more time for me? Because I want to do metal sculpture, man. I want to stop this and just go be a metal sculptor. And I do that, but I rarely have time for it. So, I thought I can't leave this without sharing information. So I've been cooking that idea in my head for a while. Like, how do I share more of what I've learned? Because a lot of tribes don't go to DC, right? A lot of tribes aren't part of National Congress of American Indians. A lot of them didn't have a representative in the FCC on the Native Nations Broadband Task Force. A lot of the places I've gotten to sit and support the tribes that I've worked with over the years, a lot of people don't have that window into how things work. How do I share that stuff? So that happens. Then the pandemic hits, and, out of the pandemic comes, oh no, nobody has broadband. Oh no, what do we do about it? And so money starts to fly around. Talk of giving tribes dollars directly starts to come around. At the National Congress of American Indians, we've been working with that concept for over a decade and been promoting $1 billion to the Fed every time they asked, like, what's it going to take to get tribes started on this? And NCAI has always been pushing that $1 billion platform as a stable starting point to move forward from, but it would be a realistic investment to start this out. Well, somebody grabbed the number and said, okay, let's do this. And so NTIA gets $1 billion to distribute with tribes. So they make an announcement, people are like, okay, we've got to apply for this. What do we do? And I am a visible character in a lot of space in Indian country, a lot of different, consortium spaces, as well as like national meetings and different things. So I can start getting phone calls and emails like, Matt, we want to apply for this. What do we do? Matt, this is going on. Plus, we were just promoting to a lot of tribes this tribal priority window for spectrum through the FCC. So I had reached out with my peers to 189 tribes in promoting that open window. So I had a lot of correspondence going on, and people were like, man, we just need to get together. We need this. But because of COVID, you can't come on the reservation. So what are we going to do? And then Chris Mitchell from ILSR and one of our instructor friends, Spencer Sevilla, really probably Spencer's idea is like, I bet we can get Matt to host this at his place. And they pitched it to me about getting a bunch of people together to talk about that tribal priority window and how to deploy that license and how to actually execute that license and, other broadband topics. So, reached out to Internet Society. And at the time, Mark Buell was in Internet Society. Now he's at Clear Sky Connections, which is a tribal-owned nonprofit in Canada, and they're doing the Indigenous Connectivity Summit up there. But he was at ISOC at the time. He said, I've got money to make this happen. So he he infused it with enough money to make it happen. We got 29 people together. I think it was 7 tribes, maybe 9 tribes. And we sat around and talked about the tribal priority window, how to deploy the license, showed them how to use the gear, had gear, gave away some gear. Didn't do anything with fiber that time, talked about it a little bit. And it was one of those events that was just kind of like, I think we discovered something that we didn't know was needed. People were in tears at the end of it because they were so happy that they now had this resource. Not to mention the 29 people that showed up were now in touch with each other. And a lot of these groups didn't think that anybody else was doing this kind of work. And they were so happy to be able to reach out to a neighbor tribe or another tribe and just have conversations about, solutions and stuff. So that was the genesis of it. And then Chris and I looked at each other and thought, man, we, like good scientists or people that follow science, let's just prove this thing. Like, it's got to be fake. It had to be a one-off. There's no way it works twice. Let's do another one to prove it. And we had the second one. It was like 45 people. I think there were 14 tribes involved. And it became even more groundbreaking. We brought fiber in. We exposed folks to splicing fiber, taking the myth away from all that stuff, pulling back the curtain, no mystery here. This is what you actually need to learn how to do. And, we changed trajectory for many tribes that were looking at that funding, specifically the Hoopa Valley tribe. And Spaggy and Linnea will tell you this, that they got exposed to splicing fiber and understood fiber optics for the first time. They brought that home. They altered their application. They applied for a fiber to the home grant rather than a wireless to the home grant. And they were awarded the single largest award for a single tribe for NTIA's Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. And they're executing that now. They've gone on to evolve to be a joint builder for the state of California, first in history, a tribe building communications infrastructure for the state. 4 more tribes in the state of California have followed that example and are doing that as well. So feel very responsible for, at least getting the right people in the room to make that kind of stuff happen.
Yeah. So what is your kind of take on the future for broadband in California then? Are you, because I know there's a couple things to be reasonably hopeful about.
Yeah. So California is energetically building a roughly 8,000 miles of fiber optics throughout the state, mostly in areas where there isn't existing routes, and creating this giant middle mile opportunity for last mile groups to tie into to get back to the rest of the world.
So just real quick for just general listeners, explain what middle mile and last mile means.
So a last mile network, which tribes like to call the first mile network, is their community, right? It's their administration, their municipalities, and their homes. So that reservation-based network is the last mile, or better term, first mile network, right? Then you have the infrastructure of the global internet, those giant, data centers and co-location facilities and hubs of the internet where big transmission lines go back and forth to different areas. Think big cities, think big continents, moving all over the world. So a last mile or first mile network has to get to one of those locations to get on the rest of the world's internet. And the gap in the middle is called middle mile. So that's what's missing. So in 2016, I worked with Obama's administration to identify why tribes weren't actually, having access to broadband. And we all kind of knew that they had no access to middle mile. So what did that actually look like? Well, we worked with all the carriers under non-disclosure, laid all the maps together, and GIS work identified 8,000 missing miles in the lower 48 states from a meaningful location. So like a library, a school, or a tribal office on a reservation to the nearest fiber. Now, we didn't even know if we could break into that fiber to get access to it, but to the nearest fiber was 8,000 missing miles for 320 reservation locations. So that was a problem. California had 1,800 of those miles. California is building an 8,000 mile network, which is erasing some of those miles. Unfortunately, not all the miles to 109 tribes that are in this state. So my outlook on California's broadband future, I think it's good. With this extra 8,000 miles plus the things that it's sort of kicking off, which there are joint builders involved producing the results for, let me take a wild one here. I think it's over 7,000 miles of it is a joint build with a partner. You name it. Some of them are, most of them are building part of this network. They're also building other things in California. So there's a lot more investment being done in California than just the 8,000 miles. There's also now a lot of like last mile providers that are going, oh, my ISP is located in this little town and I didn't have access to that little town, but now I'm going to, grow my ISP to be in both those locations or 5 locations because now I see an opportunity to tie my offices back together and run this network, to multiple locations. So there's big growth in broadband in California. I'm excited to be here because I get to work with all 109 tribes, making sure that they're aligned with this process.
So going big picture, and you can speak to this in as much or as little detail as you like, but when you look at what's going on contemporarily right now, and all the work you've done on behalf of tribes over the years, what is your take on just where the country's at?
So we could get real specific with this one, but I'm not very satisfied with where this country's headed at the moment. I feel like a lot of the opportunities that we've been building on over the last, almost quarter century now in my career in this space have been dissolved in the first 150 days and of this administration. And we are looking at some real damaging rewinding of the clock on some of the historical changes that have happened in this country. And, to the tune of declassifying the tribal political status with the federal government, the trust relationships, the sovereignty, and things like that. I think tribes have a real tough road ahead. The country has a tough road ahead, but tribes specifically also have a very tough road ahead because they're being singled out in this space. And I think it's one of the reasons to build broadband in your tribal community is to manage your own communications. Don't be reliant upon, handouts from a federal government who's not looking out for you. Whether or not that would even transpire into a network or not, it's doubtful. But, not being reliant upon industry, not being reliant upon the federal government for things and managing your own communications, managing your own data, sovereign data centers, sovereign storage facilities, encrypted transport between sovereigns. I mean, there's a number of ways to make this a safer environment for tribes in communications and in planning for their future. Personally, I'm blown away at where we're sitting in this as a country. And I'm a little concerned that we may be headed somewhere a lot more insane than everybody's just incrementally accepting. Like, oh my God, this happened. Oh my God, this happened. If you look big picture, we might be crashing the ship.
Yeah. So how does one navigate that through the communication lens, both tribal and, anybody else who just doesn't want to be part of a fascist coup?
Yeah, right. Yeah, the fascist regime is not in vogue for us. So, encryption, being mindful of the way you set up a network, the way you manage a network, securities, protocols, standards, staying up with the current and latest. I mean, we all know anything can get hacked, but, backups, responsible offsite storage for natural disaster, for, human disaster, whatever the case, be prepared, be planning ahead, do your work, do your due diligence, and make sure that you're not just humdrum walking down the street and thinking everything's going to be sorted. Plan ahead. I mean, I can't say enough after seeing like the 15 or so ransomware attacks we've seen on different tribes, how scary that is. They're losing their enrollment records, losing all the, a lot of their historical stuff, having some backups, but not all the backups. I mean, it's really crucial. And now we're seeing opportunities like from the boot camps, specifically 3 or 4 of the tribes within the boot camps are talking about hosting their data in duplication on multiple other sovereign small data center solutions. So like they don't have to go to, to a commercial provider to be able to host the proprietary sovereign records that they have. They can actually host that in another sovereign. They can install their own gear at that data center, and they can tie their network together nationally and protect their data. National Congress of American Indians and American Indian Policy Institute at Arizona State University have announced a Center for Tribal Digital Sovereignty, and this is really a place where tribes are coming together to define, what happens to their traffic, what happens to their data, what happens, in collection scenarios and things like that. Because if you look at like the federal government, they're quite demanding on what needs to be turned in when a grant is applied for. And some of that data is somewhat personalized and private sovereign data to be able to get that grant award. And then the federal government will turn around and make it public, or turn around and give it to a private company that buys into the process. And then they have access to this information, whether it gets used for marketing or whatever, who knows. But that's not what the tribes intended when they gave up that data. So that is being defined, and hopefully standards are being set across Indian country where, this is acceptable, but that is not. And so this is how we want to manage our data moving forward and our relationship with your collection process. So it comes down to that kind of stuff. And one of the things I told tribal leaders when I first got involved with Southern California Tribal Chairmen in 2001, I said, if you don't want other people to know about it, don't put it on the internet. Don't put it in email. Don't put it in text. Have a verbal conversation. You have an oral tradition of having conversations about important things and not writing them down and not putting them out there for somebody to snoop upon. I said, practice that. Remember that historical way, because that is the only way that it isn't going to be spread around.
Where can people go to learn more about everything going on? Tribal Broadband Bootcamp. Anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, tribalbroadbandbootcamp.org is now also associated with waskawiwin.org, WASKAWIWIN, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that allows us to have relationships with corporate, philanthropic, and foundations alike to be able to support the boot camps. The boot camps are, I think, a crucial starting point for folks. We're not providing certifications in fiber splicing. We're not providing certifications in tower climbing or anything like that. But we have avenues and friends and partners in the industry where we can, provide guidance on where you need to do those things. The biggest, I think, boost for a tribal organization, tribal government, that is interested in broadband, or even one that's fairly far along that wants to enhance their service capabilities and just their overall effort, is to come to a boot camp, not necessarily because I'm in the front of the room or Chris is in front of the room, or even some of our instructors are in the front of the room, but to get in an environment where everybody's looking at solutions that solve problems that you're dealing with, to get your head around what that responsibility is to your community and how cumbersome it might be or how manageable it might be. Get exposed to the technology that really kind of dispels all those myths about how hard it is to do something. Get your hands on it, get dirty, figure it out, and then decide, you make an accurate decision on whether or not this is something for your community or not. We even help those communities better understand how to manage an outside vendor. Like if they don't have the capacity to have their own network, how do you manage that outside vendor on your tribal property, and with a solution that's geared towards your tribe, not just a package that they deliver, on their brochure, but like, how can you streamline something to make it better for your community if you're not going to provide it yourself? So highly recommend, getting involved there. We have over 450 people and 80 tribes that have attended the last 18 events, and we have plenty more to come.
So last one, that's going to be a real quick fun one. On a scale of 1 to 10, and you can factor in tribes, you can factor in just regular Americans, everything. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much would you say the average person is overpaying for internet?
Yeah. The average person, well, the person who really asked this is Sasha Meinrath. They did a big study on this, and they actually got people to submit their bill and show their service record. And I think they got 1,000 independent bills so that they could do, cross-section demographic of the U.S. And I would say more than half the people are paying more money than they should for broadband. And some of them are paying a lot of money for not a lot of service. I will say that, running a small ISP, it's not rocket science, but it's communication science, and it's business, right? And if you can't run a good business, you're going to have a tough time, making the technology work. It's all about relationships with a community. It's a small environment. Everybody knows everybody, and you have to have good customer service. It's half the battle. So, I applaud all those tribes that are taking on this responsibility themselves, and know that they have their community's best interest at heart. And I feel like, I hope they're not doing it in a vacuum, so that they have the resources that they need to move forward.
Well, I was just more applying all the big cable companies across the country ripping people off.
I mean, fortunately, I live out of town, and I'm on a co-op, a utility co-op, and I'm paying more than you would pay for a gigabit symmetrical in town, but I am 30 minutes from the nearest grocery store. So I kind of feel like I think I pay $129 a month for a gig, and I'm not complaining at all. I have the funds to pay for that. And sure, I would like it to be $60, which I know that there's packages in town that are that price. But when I run a speed test at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, when everybody's supposed to be home using the internet, I still get a gig. When I run it in the middle of the night, when there's all kinds of gamers on, I still get a gig. I run it in the morning before people take off for work and they're checking their internet and doing all their stuff, I still get a gig. That's not the case in town. When you're hooked to a big network where you have a lot of shared resources, there's ebbs and flows in value of those. And I cherish the speed that I get right now.
Matt, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, it was cool. It was great to have you at the boot camp, and I look forward to, future opportunities to work together.
That was Matthew Rantanen. Check out everything he's got going on. Wasco We Win, Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which Matthew is not directly involved with, but he collaborates with. And, of course, Tribal Broadband Bootcamp. I hope to attend another one in the future. It was life-changing. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Saxonell. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Bay Watching Podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Please leave us a review and a 5-star if you would. This is still a very new show in the big scheme of things. And every review, every 5-star, every friend you tell about this thing helps to join us on our journey to 1,000. And if you want to support this show on the sustainability end, you can do so over at patreon.com/romplacone. For Give What You Can, Love You, get all kinds of exclusive content. You get full stand-up clips not available anywhere else. You get information and insider info on upcoming films and projects. You're probably going to get to see Termination Fee in its entirety before anybody else does. And we do a Zoom hang once a month. That's a really cool hang with like-minded people over on Patreon. And that's for a Give What You Can level. Even $1 a month goes a long way. So patreon.com/romplacone. All right, 1994 was a tough year for music. That was definitely a tough year. Kurt Cobain passed away in 1994. A lot of Nirvana themes as I'm going through the years, but it's that time in the 90s. How can it not be? 94 was heavy. We actually have I mentioned this last week, but we do have a Seattle music-centric episode coming up soon. But until then, catch you next week. Peace. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1,000 is doing for me, and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1,000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1,000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.